Well, there's a great story about Buster Keaton, who religiously previewed all his comedies, you know, and took a picture out, I think it was called Seven Chances. And it was a wonderful reaction to the picture, and it didn't have a good ending. It just sort of lay there at the end, you know. It was a great chase with women chasing him because they were all brides, a wonderful scene. And it sort of petered out, and that was it, you know. And the audience said, and he felt something was wrong. But right toward the end of the scene, he's running away from these women, and he's running down a hill, and rocks got dislodged and rolled after him. This big laugh from the audience, and that was it. Mm-hmm. And he said, we're going to shoot a new ending. And he went back, and he shot for about a week, and he built an avalanche. He started with 3 rocks, and he built it to bigger rocks, and finally these huge boulders, you know, the size of those cameras, you know, rolling down after him. Well, it's one of the great sequences ever done.
Why did Keaton hit the skids? That's seems to be one of the sad mysteries of Hollywood.
Well, he was essentially a pantomime artist, yeah. And when sound came along, the pantomime artists went out of business, really, and also they were killed by something brand new, cartoons.
Chuck Jones, who directed most of the great Bugs Bunny Roadrunner cartoons, and he said he was totally influenced by Buster Keaton.
Joseph Frank Keaton was born October 4th, 1895, in Piqua, Kansas. He was the son of vaudevillians Myra and Joe Keaton, who were a married comedy team touring the country. That's how they happened to be in Piqua, Kansas, a small farming community they were passing through when Myra went into labor.
He was born literally in a trunk. His parents were part of the family medicine show, and he was considered part of the company at the age of 11 months.
He wandered on stage one day when they were doing their act and bothered them. And the audience thought it was funny.
By the time he was 4 years old, little Joe Frank Keaton had actually become a star in vaudeville, the youngest ever.
Buster was dressed exactly the same as his father, Galway whiskers in the bit. Joe Keaton would be on the top of the table doing his various acrobatic maneuvers, and Buster would come up behind him with a broom, and he'd sweep the broom across and knock him down. And so that's how that act began.
Famous as a human projectile his father used to throw at his mother during their act, now known as the Three Keatons.
The Three Keatons was considered one of the roughest acts in vaudeville at the time. Were it not so funny, people would be appalled or aghast at how Buster was treated on stage, but it was all pretty much an illusion.
They had a handle on him, like a suitcase. They just throw him around the stage.
Had a little handle on his back so they could throw him better.
In several states, his father was accused of child abuse since the act mainly consisted of little Joe being thrown everywhere imaginable on the stage, and once, famously, even at an annoying heckler in the audience.
I said, he'd throw you into the audience? He said, the old man wasn't a bad guy. He'd always say, tighten up your ass before he threw me.
They were arrested numerous times, but managed to get around the law because, as Buster put it, the law read that no child under the age of 16 shall do acrobatics, walk wire, play musical instruments, trapeze, and it named everything. But none of them said you couldn't kick him in the face.
Really, it defies logic that Joe Keaton would want to seriously or intentionally injure his son because Buster was the star of the act. The Three Keatons, they were giving $750 a week, $250 of which were Buster's. This was at a time when a child might get an allowance of $0.05 a week, and here he's tooling around in his own car at the age of 12.
His father had taught him how to take a fall, however, as well as other acrobatics, and, in fact, out of over 10,000 performances, little Joe only got hurt slightly twice. But boy, did this kid love making people laugh. Every time he took a fall, they laughed, which is how he got his famous moniker. According to Buster's father, Joe, it was the famous magician Harry Houdini, a personal friend of the Keatons, after watching the kid fall down a flight of stairs unhurt at the age of 6 months, who said, "That's some Buster your kid took." Now, it may not have been Houdini who said it, but what the hell. A Buster in those days was known to mean a fall. Nothing could have been more appropriate. Eventually, Buster Keaton took the funniest falls in pictures, a virtual symphony of them throughout his career. Anyway, back to that later. The three Keatons, Myra, Joan, Buster, became one of the most famous acts in vaudeville, repeatedly touring the country. And along the way, the act grew. The three Keatons became the four Keatons. Then the five Keatons. But in 1917, when Buster was 21 years old, the Keatons act broke up.
Well, our parents had to give up the vaudeville act, and he set out to support us all.
Yes. Yeah, he was determined that Louise and I would get the schooling that he never had.
Buster goes to New York and gets a contract to appear in the Shubert Brothers' annual variety show, in this case, The Passing Show of 1917, booked to open at the Winter Garden Theater on Broadway. But the Fates had a different idea. Walking down a Manhattan street, Buster runs into an old vaudevillian pal of his, who's accompanied by a tall, large man known all over the world as Fatty Arbuckle. As luck would have it, Roscoe Arbuckle, a star since 1914, was just beginning to make two reel comedies for a guy named Joe Skank at the Colony Studio on East 48th Street. Two reelers run about 20 minutes each. Arbuckle says to Keaton, "Why don't you come over and watch us make a couple of scenes?"
And once he saw Fatty Arbuckle shooting, he was changed. He knew what the future held for him.
Buster falls in love with what he sees, breaks his contract with the Shuberts, and starts working under Roscoe Arbuckle's direction for the Comique, they called it Komiki, Film Corporation, which was turning out a series of two-reel comedies. The very first screen appearance of Buster Keaton takes place in an Arbuckle short called The Butcher Boy, released in 1917. In October of the same year, that's 1917, Keaton and the entire Komiki company move across the country to make their films from then on in a town called Long Beach in California. The following year, with World War I raging in Europe, Keaton is drafted into the army. He serves in France, mainly entertaining the troops.
In World War I, he lost some hearing in one of his ears.
He was not a soldier on the front line, but maybe in training or something, he was near a can or a gun and that went off. And that affected him for the rest of his life.
Buster comes back in April of 1919 to continue his work with Arbuckle, from whom he learns a great deal about directing films, since Arbuckle directs all his own work and enjoys mentoring his new pal.
Fatty Arbuckle had largely taught Buster Keaton how to do film. Buster Keaton had taken Fatty Arbuckle's camera and taken it apart and put it back together again just to see how it worked. And, Fatty Arbuckle nearly killed him.
The Fates entered the picture again in December 1919, when Arbuckle is signed to a contract at Paramount to star in feature-length films. In those days, remember, while features were considered the main attraction, shorts like Arbuckle's or Chaplin's were a very popular and commercial addition to them. People would go out of their way to see these shorts. Sometimes they could be the whole program. So Joe Skank turns Komiki over to Keaton to direct and star in two-reel comedies to be released through Metro. Keaton sets up production at the old Charlie Chaplin Studios in Hollywood, now named the Keaton Studios. And so, between 1920 and 1923, Buster Keaton directs, writes, and stars in 19 quite popular two-reel comedies. He first makes one called The High Sign, the title referring to a ridiculous gesture which identified members of a gang. But Buster isn't entirely satisfied with this short and doesn't release it until the following year. Before he can make another two-reeler, however, Douglas Fairbanks, at that time the king of Hollywood, convinces Metro to star Buster in a feature, his first starring role, for The Saphead, based on a Broadway hit. Buster is good in the film. It helps to cement his identity as the Great Stone Face, but the picture is pretty badly dated today. He has nothing to do with the behind-the-camera making of the film, yet it adds luster to his reputation. Right afterward, he creates his second two-reeler, titled 1 Week, and that, instead, becomes the first release of a Buster Keaton production. In the plot, Buster and his new wife receive a prefabricated house as a wedding present. But a jealous rival of Buster's changes the numbers on the boxes, resulting in a disastrous house.
1 week? Boy, you can't beat 1 week. There's a great quote from Walter Kerr. He said, "Seeing 1 week is like that thing you never see, a garden at the moment of blooming."
I was taken by his cinematic artistry. I said, this is like the first time that anyone tried this. And then what a great gag with a train.
Keaton had said, "I always want an audience to outguess me, and then I double-cross them."
The short comedy receives excellent reviews and enthusiastic audiences. The Buster Keaton Company is on its way. Three more shorts follow in 1920, including Convict 13. Now, if there was one thing Buster Keaton loved, it was mechanical inventions, as is apparent in this amazing scene from The Scarecrow.
Keaton was really an inventor, an inventive guy.
He had an engineering mind that he turned toward the business of making people laugh.
Outside in his backyard, he had little railroad trains, Lionel trains going everywhere.
In the corner, he had a picnic table, and he would fix the hot dogs in the kitchen, put them on the train, toot-toot, and send them out. That was him.
And the third short of 1920, Neighbors.
I do like watching that. I've seen some of the footage of him and his dad, where Buster's head is in the ground, and his dad's trying to pull him up. It is fun watching those because they're like, oh, it's a guy messing around with his dad. There's something very sweet about it, you know, them kicking the shit out of each other.
The following year, that's 1921, Buster marries for the first time. He and actress Natalie Talmadge tie the knot at Joe Skank's estate on Long Island. Skank is married to Natalie's sister, popular actress Norma Talmadge, so Buster is now his brother-in-law. In that same year, Keaton releases a total of 6 two-reelers. The Haunted House, Hard Luck, the aforementioned The High Sign, The Goat, The Playhouse, a comic experiment of Buster's in which he plays every single role in the dream sequence. And finally, one of his absolute classic two-reelers, The Boat, for which the toughest joke to achieve was the instant sinking of the boat on its launch. It just wouldn't go straight down, which is the only way Buster thought it would be funny. Finally, Buster and his crew came up with an elaborate pulley system to drag the boat under the water. By now, the Great Stone Face has become a nickname as familiar to audiences as the pork pie hat he always wears, the last thing to go underwater.
If I can show you this, this is a gift from Eleanor Keaton, and she made me a hat, exactly the one that Buster would wear. I don't know, you know. And my head blew up before we shot this. I had a bad sandwich.
The boat itself is named Damfino, a name the members of the International Buster Keaton Society have adopted for themselves, the Damfinos. In the picture, the joke is paid off when Buster SOS's and is asked the name of his boat. The boat itself is another of Keaton's wild mechanical inventions, one that is not exactly perfect.
He was born to be a silent movie comedian because his face, his non-expressive face, expressed so much.
Well, Buster had those big eyes, though. Anyway, great legs, too.
He had that blank face that you could sort of paint your feelings onto.
The Great Stone Face.
They called him that, the Great Stone Face, but it was far from accurate. Buster's face had a great variety of expressions. His eyes alone told many emotions. He just didn't ever smile.
He's got a mime's face. It's like Jean-Louis Barrault in Les Enfants du Paradis, that beautiful white face. Buster had that face.
It just struck me in this way that this man could do all of these things without saying a word and without moving his face, and you knew exactly what the story was.
Acting is in the eyes, not the face. It just shows you how little you have to do sometimes to sell something. You don't try to sell it. Just be natural.
Buster Keaton always had that quiet tragedy, which is very, very funny.
It's such a strange thing to watch the Fatty Arbuckle ones, where he's still making big facial expressions and doing all the sort of tropes of the era. When you see that start to fade away, it was just effortless. It's the stone face performance. It's not forcing you to laugh. And for me, that just made me laugh. I just did Spider-Man, and there was a very clear influence. You know, Spider-Man, other than having his eyes move just a little bit, he's stone face. Here I have this character who has almost no expression in his face, but there's so much personality you want to create and so much humor that you want to bring out in the physicality. So I just went back and watched a bunch of Buster Keaton films. I use that as a baseline for so many Spider-Man moments.
A total of 7 popular Keaton two-reelers are released in 1922. The Paleface, My Wife's Relations, The Blacksmith, Daydreams, The Electric House, and perhaps one of his most well-remembered shorts, Cops, debuts.
There are a lot of amazing things about his filmmaking, but more than anything for me, the idea that he'd be in these really heightened comic scenarios played incredibly seriously. Such a fun aspect of comedy that heightens not only the humor but also the stakes of every scene that he was playing.
That thing in Cops where he grabs that car and flies up, I mean, that's unreal.
Even he couldn't explain it. I said, was the film speeded up? He said, no. How he did that was superhuman. There were no tricks. He just did it. That would have jerked anyone else's arm off.
One of the things that always bugged me about comedians when I was a little boy, because I really like comedy, I really like comedians, was the fact that they had to be weaker than the other males in the movie. They had to be infantile. They had to act like a blithering idiot, or they had to be cowards, or they had to be scared. I mean, the joke is that Bob Hope is standing up against Jesse James. That always bugged me. Why do they have to be lesser than? Why can't they be males? Why can't they be masculine? And Buster Keaton was that. And he'd put himself against guys who were taller than him, so he always had a slight, height deficit. He was a real exciting hero.
That same year, 1922, he also does a parody of Western star William S. Hart called The Frozen North, and the satire is merciless. Hart always cried in his films, so of course, Buster laid it on thick. Buster said Bill Hart did not speak to me for 2 years after he saw that picture. Meanwhile, Buster's pal, Fatty Arbuckle, is tried, tragically, on charges of manslaughter. After 3 trials, Roscoe is exonerated, but the scandal nevertheless utterly destroys his career. To avoid any connection with this Arbuckle tragedy, Schenck changes the Komiki Film Corporation to Buster Keaton Productions. His final 2 shorts are released in 1923, The Balloonatic and his last, The Love Nest.
In a way, Buster Keaton is the essence of movies. He is one of the inventors of cinema.
Buster Keaton Remembered is the book. I have it on my desk all the time because they were the fathers of my industry, my art, my business.
The way they made movies, it's still the same way that you make movies, basically. They made the art form.
He was such a great director. He puts himself in these impossible situations. It's definitely underplayed, and therefore I think it's more powerful.
For Keaton, cinema was important. It wasn't the camera nailed to the floor or nailed to the moving truck. It was jokes that worked because of the movie camera. It was cinema itself that became the joke.
I think a lot of my daring in terms of breaking the fourth wall came from Keaton, who, when Sherlock Jr. pointed out that it's a movie. And I'm always pointing out somewhere in my films that we're making a movie. Like when I did Spaceballs.
He did it.
Buster's always been with me and always will be with me. Our stunts always play in the wide. There's no fudging. The guy doing the stunt is doing it for real, and he felt very strongly about that, and I feel very strongly about that.
I stole as many moves as I could from him. Buster said, you hit the ground with your hand as you're going down, and it absorbs some of the impact. And it works.
The influence that he had on me was that he could do all these insane stunts and do these crazy things with his body, but at the same time, he was never like pushing it in the performance.
Such control of his body, such agility. He was like a ballet dancer. Incredible control of his body.
Amazing stunts, really. I think like nobody ever would dare. He has no fear or he's crazy.
He's really doing what you see, which is true in almost all of his films. What you see is what you get. And to me, the best special effect in those films is Buster.
In that same year, 1923, Buster finally gets his long-time wish fulfilled, and he starts to make his own feature films. Already finishing 2 of them in that same busy 12-month period. Over the next 5 years, Keaton conceives, directs, and stars in an additional 8 feature comedies, the 10 being the greatest work of his career.
There's no question that the films he made in the 20s are his masterworks.
We will be coming back to these in detail after a while. Following this extraordinary high point, Buster makes what he would call the biggest mistake of my life. Joe Schenck convinces Keaton to sign with Joe's brother, Nick Schenck, at MGM, the biggest studio in Hollywood and perhaps the most regimented. Both Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd advise him very strongly not to give up his independence, but unfortunately, Buster trusts Joe Schenck.
They were great friends. They were married to sisters, but Schenck really made a deal with MGM.
A perfect storm follows. Buster is drinking too much. His marriage is falling apart, and sound comes in and takes over the picture business. The silent era is finished. As Chaplin would say, just when we got it right, it was over.
Right before he did that stunt on the facade for Steamboat Bill Jr., they come up to him and said, look, MGM just bought your rights, and he's going through all that with his wife. He just got 2 terrible cases of bad news right before you do a stunt that could take his life, and he still did it.
If it was an inch or half an inch one way or the other, he could have been killed. He was feeling so down and so depressed that he didn't care. And you know, that bit might have been used more than any bit in the history of the world.
We did that in Jackass #2. We did an homage. The guy who rigged it said, look, when you get on that spot, don't move. This is a 20-foot high steel wall. And they said, action. So I walk a couple of steps, and then someone says, cut, cut, cut. I just walk off my mark. There was silence on the stage, except for my 9-year-old daughter. And she's like, Daddy, you idiot, what are you doing? And that kind of loosened the vibe up. It was still funny, probably funnier.
For all his own shorts and features, except for the general, Buster never had a script. He and his people would come up with a good beginning and then figure out a satisfying finish. As he used to say, the middle would take care of itself.
Yeah, I heard him say that.
So many things happened on the spur of the moment. He said you would get an idea and just do it.
It allows for so much spontaneity. If you get gold, that could affect our story, and instead of going this direction, we could go that direction.
In 3 Ages, when he takes that leap from one building to another that he was supposed to jump across, but he didn't make it. And so he leaves it in, right? And creates a whole wonderful sequence.
At MGM, this was strictly unacceptable. Scripts were essential. Everything spelled out, hashed over, budgeted, scheduled to the hour.
Buster lost all of his power.
He lost his freedom.
They threw him into the meat grinder that was their production system. Comedians like Buster were used to having the time to go out, shoot things, try them in front of an audience, reshoot them, rethink the structure of the film, preview it again, etc. And that's not the way they were set up at MGM. Keaton was used to making films that cost 2-3 times what mainstream features were costing then. Steamboat Bill, for instance, that's a film that cost nearly $500,000 to make. The same year, a Lon Chaney feature, and Chaney was very popular with audiences, that $175,000.
Right with Buster's first movie at MGM, The Cameraman, the difference is quite noticeable. Even his pork pie hat has been replaced with a far more upscale version. There are some good moments in the movie, but the overall timing and construction are off. His last silent film, which he neither conceived nor directed, Spite Marriage, has only one memorable sequence, and the studio wanted to cut it. Luckily, they didn't succeed, and Keaton scores one final slapstick classic as he tries to put his drunken wife to bed. It is a routine he would repeat on stages throughout the rest of his career. In 1930, Buster stars in his first talking picture, Free and Easy.
All the boys with high blood pressure, all the girls with too much flesh, your day has come at last.
Followed that same year by Doughboys.
On guard. Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up.
Neither of them is any good, but they are popular. When I first saw Free and Easy in 1969, I wrote that it was, quote, depressingly bad and almost perfectly calculated to destroy its star, a dismal mess in which one can literally see Keaton drowning, unquote.
Doggone it, the man said I was a big comedian and I was going to get a big contract and everything is great.
Of course, Buster has nothing to do with the direction or scripts of these films, nor with any of the ones released through MGM, such as Parlor, Bedroom, and Bath, which, by the way, was filmed partially at his Italian villa estate in Beverly Hills, and includes a bit MGM recycled from that first two-reeler of his, One Week. Or the 3 movies he made co-starring Jimmy Durante. They all date badly.
They're dreadful. And you can tell that he's unhappy. I mean, he seems miserable. They don't realize, like, this guy's a genius. You can't just slap him together with Jimmy Durante in some dopey movie.
What's that? That's a kangaroo. A what? A kangaroo. A native of Australia.
Oh.
What's the matter?
My sister married one of them.
Buster was a very mild person. He didn't say much to defend himself ever. He just stewed. He blamed himself for anything that was wrong. I'd say, those sons of bitches treated you badly. Oh, they weren't so bad. They treated you bad. Nah. He just lost his heart there.
In 1932, Buster's wife Natalie divorces him and legally changes the last names of their 2 sons from Keaton to Talmadge, which devastates him.
First marriage, which ended so badly. He said, I wasn't the best husband in the world either. He said, what are you going to do when you walk into your dressing room and there's a naked girl standing there waiting for you? I said, did that happen? He said, it happened all the time.
The following year, in 1933, Keaton is having more problems with alcohol, and after sending him to rehab a number of times, where he met a young nurse named May Scriven, and whom he eventually married, MGM mogul Louis B. Mayer, fed up with his drinking, fires him.
It was one of the worst mishandlings of creative talent in history. They wrecked him for years, MGM.
Abbott and Costello made their worst movies at MGM. Laurel and Hardy made their worst movies at MGM. Marx Brothers, after Irving Thalberg's death, made their worst movies at MGM. The studio was just not a conducive place to make that kind of visual slapstick comedy.
The drinking increases, and after 3 years, May divorces Buster. This, plus many financial issues, is finally too much for Keaton. He suffers a nervous breakdown and is taken to an army hospital in a straitjacket. Newspaper reports of the day write that Buster may never act again.
At that time, he'd made all of his great movies. He was in a low point in his life. And it's in the 30s. He had just made a movie in France, which never made it to the States. He was coming back on the ship. Some publicity people hooked him up, it seems, with Jack Pearl, a great vaudevillian, fast-talking, was Baron Munchausen. He worked an accent. And Keaton knew that stuff in and out. And they were sort of set up to do a patter duo.
My Aunt Sophie? In the middle of the ocean. You got off to see your Aunt Sophie? Yes. Yeah. How'd you get off?
I got off the boat, walked down, and went over to see her.
Because Keaton would kind of go along with the routine, but Keaton's heart wasn't really in it. He looked tired. He wasn't really keeping the rhythm going, and Munchausen's whole thing was,
And I tell you something, there was a mermaid, she was playing the piano. She was teaching the fishes their scales. Why don't you say something?
And there was an anger between them.
You know, I saw one fish tuning the piano. You know what kind of fish that was?
Had the slightest idea. What?
And Munchausen, Jack Pearl just grabbed him. It's a chilling thing. Keaton, he looks to me like he's saying, what am I doing here? Why am I acting like a feed to this vaudeville comic?
After one entire year of total sobriety, he took what he called his final drink. He downed it and only rarely thereafter fell off the wagon. In his later years, he would drink a single glass of beer every evening, just one, with no ill effects. From 1934 through 1937, Keaton stars in 16 short comedies for a company called Educational Pictures. He has very little to do with their construction or direction, but certain Keaton moments shine through.
Be quiet.
By now, he has conquered his problems with alcoholism, yet one of his co-stars reports that between shots, Buster would go into a corner of the set and cry. In 1939, Columbia Pictures hires him to star in 10 two-reel comedies. Again, he has no control over the pictures.
In a little Spanish town, 'twas on a night like this. Stars were peekabooing down, 'twas on a night like this.
They all have flashes of Keaton magic, though little else. Die-hard Keaton fans are happy that they exist at all. But they are a far cry from his 20s work.
Would you care to dance with me?
Would I?
He would refer to all these pictures as, quote, cheaters. From 1937 to 1950, Buster works intermittently for MGM as a gag writer and occasional director of certain sequences. He helps Red Skelton in remaking a couple of his own silent classics.
Major, after this, they'll probably make you a colonel.
Oh, well, I'd rather that they made me a civilian.
Suggests gags for the Marx Brothers and others.
Buster was so modest, he would always take me over to one side, and anytime he had an idea, he would say, I think this would be a funny thing to do. And then I would go out and do it, but he always tried to make other people believe that it was my idea. It was really Buster.
His salary at MGM has gone from $3,000 a week to a weekly $100.
You're only getting paid this much to work for them, and he used to be one of the biggest stars at the studio, and he says, well, if I'm worth more, they'll pay me more. It's just kind of very down-to-earth.
In 1940, Keaton marries for the last time to the lovely and loving Eleanor Norris.
They had met when she was a dancer at MGM. She was just the warmest, most wonderful woman.
She was so important to his midlife and later years. She saved his life as far as I'm concerned.
She had that sort of forthrightness, no BS, tell it like it is kind of personality. And at the same time, she would do absolutely anything to keep Buster's name out there.
Eleanor often plays the passed-out wife in Keaton's routine from Spite Marriage of putting a drunken woman to bed. They do this together all over the place, including Ed Sullivan's popular TV show. It is a very happy marriage and continues for the rest of his life.
Lie down. That's the best advice I can give you. Want a spotlight so you'll photograph prettier? There. That'll bring out the sweat on his brow.
I'm gonna sell her.
In 1947, Buster performs for a season at the Cirque Medrano in Paris. He is a big hit there and returns numerous times over the next few years. 2 years later, in 1949, at the age of 54, he returns to MGM in a supporting role to Judy Garland for the musical In the Good Old Summertime. He even writes and directs one sequence in the film with Judy and co-star Van Johnson.
Oh,
pardon, madam. Here,
Oh,
let me help you
I
out.
never. Let's watch where you're going.
Here, I'll fix your hat for you. No, that's not quite the right
My hat
angle.
alone.
Oh, here's your umbrella. I don't really know what happened. Oh, here's your bag, madam.
Ah!
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Oh, heaven's sakes. Leave me alone.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Here's your hat.
Thank you.
Something's missing.
Where's my bird? My bird.
Here's your bird. Here we are, madam. I'm so sorry.
What?
Wrong bird. Look, here's my card. That's where I work, see? Now you go buy yourself whatever I've ruined, and I'll be glad to pay for it, all right?
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Wait a minute.
That same year, novelist, poet, film critic James Agee publishes in Life magazine his famous article about the silent period titled Comedy's Greatest Era, in which Buster is heavily featured as being, along with Chaplin and Lloyd, one of the three greatest comedy stars of that time. Harry Langdon is the fourth. This leads to a weekly half-hour television show in Los Angeles called The Buster Keaton Show.
Nappy.
Who are you?
I'm Josephine.
Haven't we met someplace before?
But of course, I am your wife.
This, in turn, leads to other numerous TV commercials, industrial films, and television appearances.
That was rather wild applause. Are you a living American blonde?
A living? Did I hear the question? Are you a living American blonde?
That's right. No!
$1.09 to go, Mr. Cavett.
Buster Keaton was a god to me. I heard about a commercial to be done in the style of a silent movie, and I knew I had to be in it. I was a Keystone cop, and there were about 6 of us chasing Buster. Most of the actors are about 35 or 40, and he's in maybe late 60s, and he outran us.
He gave 100% to everything he did on camera, whether it was a cameo in a feature film.
Pardon me, young woman. I'm sorry, but oh, what a lovely baby.
Or a TV commercial. I've seen a lot of those. And they're all worth watching because he always gives you something.
Simon Pure Beer presents Buster Keaton.
He did a whole series for Northwest Orient.
Give wings to your heart. Fly northwest to Florida. Enjoy champagne, filet mignon, or lobster tail in flight.
Northwest Orient Airlines.
All part of Northwest's Imperial Service. Only Northwest Orient Airlines flies to sunny Florida, adventurous Alaska, romantic Hawaii, coast to coast, and to the mysterious Orient.
Northwest Orient Airlines.
He did a series for Alka-Seltzer.
Pardon me, sir. Have you made a New Year's resolution?
Yes. Always keep Alka-Seltzer handy.
He loved, apparently, the fact that he could do a day's work and walk away with $5,000 or $10,000.
Everybody has fun at the circus.
Except me. I'm tired.
Attention, please. Bravo, the lion tamer has had a slight accident. Balloon Man 13 has just volunteered to take his place.
I did?
Oh, the poor guy. He's got an aching head, an upset stomach,
and a lion.
What you need is some Alka-Seltzer.
He was very active in television. I saw him on The Ed Sullivan Show. I saw him on Candid Camera.
Candid Camera.
Candid Camera.
Candid Camera, which I was on myself, I might add. And they paid me $10. Alan Funt. Alan, God bless you. I hope you're having fun up there. Ripping the angels off, son of a bitch.
Now watch the pepper. The top will come off. His wristwatch went in his suit. She's trying to hold it in.
It was fantastic, and it was effortless.
His timing just had that razor edge.
He's such a master at this. Watch him very carefully.
You know, it's magic. It's unreal.
Watch carefully, carefully.
This is your life. You see a man who's used to being quite stone-faced, who's seemingly overcome by emotion in a way that's pretty touching to see.
And later on, when things got rough, you move in with your mom into the first little house that you'd bought for her. And to your home comes a girl who has made friends with your family, a girl who's to remove any possible remainder of disappointment in your life. And here she is, Eleanor Norris, who became your devoted wife 16 years ago, Mrs. Keaton. Here's a pretty gal. Come on, sit here by Buster. What have these...
I know.
Fix it up there, Mommy. What have these years of marriage to Buster meant, Eleanor?
Well, we've been very happy. Of course, we've had some lean times, too. But Buster's been so happy he's wanted to go back to work. And I've been very proud of the way he's come back into prominence.
You bet. And America's happy to have him back. You developed an act so that Eleanor could appear with you, didn't you, Buster?
Did you rehearse this?
Well, completing this reunion of those nearest to you, here are your two sons. From Reno, Nevada, your son Bob. From Los Angeles, Jim. Here's Bob. And here's Jim. Bob, you're a builder in Reno. What do you say about this dad of yours?
Oh, he's always been a great guy to us, Ralph.
Wonderful.
I thought of him, in addition to his great skills as a comedian, as a terrific actor.
If he had turned his attentions, as he did sometimes later on, to straight dramatic work, he would have done very well at it.
You can keep dismissing them, stripping them of all power, disgracing them, and replacing them until the end of time, and it still won't get my overcoat back. And when I protest, they'll still throw me into prison, because it's not they. They're just part of a machine that was to give us so much happiness. This machine that reduces a broken heart to a number in a catalog that says a hungry child is nothing more than 26583-Y. Stop it. The machine that has made us forget what kindness, warmth, and pity means. When you say you care, you lie. You can't possibly care. None of us can care. We've forgotten it all.
In 1950, Buster is seen briefly in Billy Wilder's savage Hollywood drama, Sunset Boulevard, playing one of the uncharitably named waxworks.
The others around the table would be actor friends, dim figures you may still remember from the silent days. I used to think of them as her waxworks.
1 diamond. 1 heart.
Spade? Pass.
3 no trump. Pass.
Pass.
In 1953, he appears with Charlie Chaplin in a few scenes from Chaplin's Limelight. For silent movie buffs, it is a golden moment.
I never thought we'd come to this.
The one and only time these two giants of early Hollywood appeared together.
That's a most extraordinary scene. I was in awe of him. I thought, this is a man who's descended from another sphere.
I had tons of memorabilia of Keaton. And Eleanor, beautiful Eleanor, she's walking around and saying, yeah, I was with him when he shot that, and I was with him during Limelight. And so I was able to ask, I said, how did Charlie treat Buster? She said, he treated Buster just like a king.
In the last scene of the picture, Buster had taken it on himself to see that Charlie got the best shot he could possibly get of his death scene. Charlie designed the shot that he's in the center of the camera, seemingly unconscious. He couldn't see the shot, and there was no one there to direct Charlie. Buster, he happened to be beside me. I wasn't aware of him till I heard whispering. And as we were pulling back, I hear Buster saying, don't move, Charlie. You're in the center of the shot. That's good. They were two geniuses collaborating with each other.
Out of the blue in 1957, Paramount buys the rights to Buster's life, and they produce a biopic starring Donald O'Connor titled The Buster Keaton Story, which has almost nothing at all to do with his real-life story, but the $50,000 he has paid for these rights enables him to buy his ranch in Woodland Hills, California, where he lived for the rest of his life.
I'm Buster Keaton, vaudeville star. Where'd you get a pass?
In there, studio manager's office.
Thanks.
Wait a minute. Where's your pass?
I'm going inside to get it.
You can't go in unless you got one already.
Yeah, but how can I, if I...
Easy. If the studio wants you, they'll send for you.
It's Oscar night in Hollywood.
In 1960, Buster is awarded a special Oscar from the Academy, celebrating his over 40 years in pictures.
It is only proper that the people who made these pictures should also be rewarded in some fashion.
In 1964, he appears in a short film written by the avant-garde Irish writer Samuel Beckett, titled simply Film, all shot in Lower Manhattan. Buster claims not to have a clue as to what the little picture is all about, and some of his fans detest the short film. To this day, it remains a controversial choice for him to have made. And the following year, 1965, he stars in a short film made for the Canadian National Railways titled The Railrodder.
It's like his 20th and silent short film. He had a chance with that after all the years of the studio system. It was just him and a young director who was enthusiastic, and they had the time and space. They had 6 or 8 weeks, and they were creating gags on the fly. And he's that same guy that he was in 1924. It's great that he had a chance to make one last film as that character.
Stand by. Okay, roll.
There is also a documentary of its making that was shot simultaneously, containing some very interesting and revealing moments of Keaton working out a gag.
This is the shot of the bridge that we get.
Yeah.
We get the valley like that, this damn great big bridge.
We combine the two gags, the same thing. I don't know. I put my broom down, everything else, and I wonder where I am. Out with the map, and once I get it spread, I'm helpless. When I hear shot going across that Brussels, it's all funnier. I'm chasing them but fighting a paper at the same time.
The director has decided against Buster's idea. Instead of being wrapped up in a map, Keaton crosses the bridge doing his laundry.
What happened? Didn't he tell you what he was going to do?
No, I didn't know he shifted gags on me.
Don't forget, there's still 2 other shots to complete the sequence, Buster. There's a long shot of the bridge with them going over. That's the whole center of the gag, is that long shot of the bridge.
No, the bridge is not your gag. The bridge is only suspense. A thrill. There's no gag to the bridge at all. That's the goddamn thing. It's only a dangerous place to be when there might be a collision. That's the only thing that's funny.
Well, I know the main reason they didn't want you going over the trestle with all wrapped up in newspapers and things. Said it was too dangerous.
He says, who suggested the gag? He says, you did. He says, I generally know what I'm doing. That is not dangerous. That's child's play, for the love of Mike.
So I'm gonna take the money and I'll pick it up tonight.
But his most noticeable acting work here at the end of his career was in a couple of movies in the inordinately popular teenage beach party series of the 60s, including Beach Blanket Bingo and How to Stuff a Wild Bikini.
Sorry, it was on house call.
The young kids seemed to like old Buster, but had not a clue of his storied past.
Tell daughter to come here. Daughter's a real pro. They call her the witch's witch. Frankie here wants to get back to beach where Dee Dee is, like right now. Daughter, you good kid.
He was working right up to the last. I mean, he was dying when he made The Scribe. The director of that film told me that they had a double on set, and Keaton was appalled that he would be expected to use a double anywhere. There were a couple of long shots where the double is actually seen because he was terminally ill at that point.
He died in '66, February 1st. I was working on a television show in New York, and my son called and said, "Are you done?" I said, "No, we're not done yet." He said, "Oh, call me when you're done." And I called him when I was done. I said, "Yeah, I'm done. What's up?" He said, "We lost our Buster." He died standing up, you know. He was a great bridge player, one of the greatest bridge players in the world. For a long time, he supported himself by playing bridge with a lot of the big guys at MGM. Louis B. Mayer and those guys who had dropped him, but they played bridge with him. In his house, he had a little room which was set up for a card game. This last day, he was restless, and he was playing badly. And he was standing up playing. And he sat down, and he was dead.
I did the eulogy for Stan Laurel one day in February. Exactly a year later, in February, in that same chapel, I did the eulogy for Buster. And everybody was there except for Buster.
In the fall of 1965, just a few months before his death, Buster is honored at the Venice Film Festival for his entire career, with special mention, of course, for those 10 priceless features he made in the 20s. And the first of these was titled 3 Ages, in which Buster parodied D.W. Griffith's multi-epoch drama, Intolerance, sketching out the relationship between Keaton, his beloved, and the villain, always Wallace Beery, over 3 wildly different time periods. The Stone Age, ancient Rome, and the then current 1923. However, the first feature of his to tell one continuous story was the brilliantly sardonic and uproariously funny Our Hospitality, a mordant comic masterpiece inspired by the infamous Hatfield and McCoy feud, with Buster the main target throughout. As soon as the family of the girl he's fallen for learns of his identity being the inheritor of the feud, Buster becomes a walking target. Of course, this was in the days dominated by single-shot handguns. Eventually, he figures it out, but also learns that the father told his sons that they couldn't kill him while he was actually a guest in their home. Again, Keaton relishes making fun of a dark, murderous situation. In fact, the beginning of the movie is played completely straight and is very dramatically shot, worthy of D.W. Griffith. No doubt Keaton decided to make this opening as dark as he could in order to set up the very real danger for Keaton's character, which therefore helps to elevate the humor once Buster arrives on the scene. Keaton also insisted on historical accuracy, starting with the ridiculous but true replica of an early train, which actually combined elements from two of the very first trains, one British, one American. The finale features perhaps Keaton's most spectacular stunt as he saves his girl from a waterfall. The girl is his then wife, Natalie Talmadge. Two classic Keatons are released in 1924. Sherlock Jr., in which, as a movie projectionist, he imagines himself in a picture he's projecting. With some amazing and innovative trick photography.
The dream sequence. It's an amazing feat today. And to think that he worked it out as beautifully as he did back in 1923 is just astonishing.
And one sequence that proves what an accomplished pool player Buster was. The 13 ball has been established to have a bomb in it, so Keaton manages superbly to avoid hitting that ball.
That was so sweet of him. He left me his pool cue. He was as sharp, and it ties together. Got his name on it. Probably worth a lot of money by now, huh? I'd never let go of it.
It was also during this film that Buster suffered a serious injury. While nobody would argue that he had a fair share of damage throughout his career. On Sherlock Jr., however, Buster broke his neck and didn't know it for years. Water burst out and slammed Buster onto the tracks, causing the break. But you certainly couldn't tell from the way he was moving, jaunty as ever, all done in one shot. He had headaches for a while, but didn't feel anything wrong. Years later, a doctor said to him, "When did you break your neck?" Buster said, "Never." The doctor said, "Oh, yes, you did." Keaton hired Roscoe Arbuckle to co-direct under another name because of the scandal. Buster suggested Will Be Good, but Roscoe chose William Goodrich, which was his father's middle name. However, Buster found to his sorrow that Roscoe just was no longer the same guy. That same year, 1924, saw the release of another Keaton classic among his most popular features, The Navigator, which came about simply because one of his associates heard there was a certain large ship for sale. What could Buster do with a ship? He only created a comic masterpiece in which both Buster and the girl he loves, who rejected his marriage proposal, end up alone, through numerous coincidences, on a deserted ocean liner. One of the most memorable is the sequence that follows their both figuring out there is someone else on the ship. Keaton brilliantly establishes his character's hopelessly spoiled background in a superbly economical opening. But there are a lot of gags you can do on a ship. The following year, 1925, Buster made a picture with subject matter he wasn't particularly interested in, but Joe Schenck had bought the stage play for Keaton to film, and Buster felt obliged to give it his best shot. The picture, 7 Chances, isn't one of his finest, but it does contain one of Buster's most extraordinary creations, the one with thousands of women chasing him and then an avalanche, as we showed at the start. Here's a little more of that amazing sequence. Also released in 1925 was Buster's eccentric love story between Keaton and a full-grown cow named Brown Eyes. Go West is by no means his funniest film, but it's strangely touching, and the love between the two is palpable. Eventually, the real Brown Eyes just followed Buster wherever he went. In 1926, among Keaton's most hilarious and currently least known pictures was released. Battling Butler is not so much a mistaken identity farce as a comedy about a guy saying he's a famous prizefighter, they have the same name, to impress the girl he's smitten with. Of course, Buster's character thinks he'll never have to really fight to win the girl, but he does, and the first time he gets in a ring to be trained is one of the funniest sequences. Near the beginning of Battling Butler, spoiled rich kid Keaton tries to go fishing. Or maybe shoot a duck. And the single-shot sequence is a wonderfully timed series of gags, perfectly constructed. produced the first cut.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles. And it's my great pleasure to introduce this evening, in this series of great silent films, one of the great films of all time, one of my favorites, The General, by and with Buster Keaton.
Released later in 1926 came what many people today believe is Keaton's greatest work. The General, his daring, beautifully photographed Civil War comedy, was recently voted in a poll of film critics and historians at number 18 among all movies ever made. It was also the highest polling silent picture.
Very few films in all history ever equaled it. On the subject, certainly nothing. It's 100 times more stunning visually than Gone with the Wind.
At the time of its release, however, The General was not considered all that terrific, and indeed was harshly criticized by some who said it wasn't funny seeing men get killed. The great stone face had made a dark comedy before that phrase really existed. The film was not a huge success either. Nevertheless, Buster himself always referred to The General as his best film.
Not only is it just a constantly hysterical film, I am a big proponent of action cinema, and it's one of the great action movies.
He chose to play a Southern soldier because he felt that audiences would not have as much sympathy with the Northern soldiers since they won the war. He does a more lethal version of the cannon joke from The Navigator. He also filmed what turned out to be the single most expensive shot in silent picture history. Buster's last two independent features are, strictly speaking of laughs, perhaps his funniest of all. In 1927, College was released. It was not a huge success, but it's hard to understand why, because it is filled with hilarious sequences. Harold Lloyd had had a huge success with The Freshman in 1925, a college story that featured some very funny material about football. Keaton took on every other possible sport. Early in the movie, Buster tries to get a job as a soda jerk and watches the pro at his position. Claims he can do as well. The resultant sequence is one of Keaton's tour de force comedy routines. In a later sequence, his classmates are giving him a hard time in a brilliantly constructed number. Buster's last independent feature was released in 1928, the extraordinary final year of the silent era, and Steamboat Bill Jr. remains among his most uproarious works, climaxed by an amazing hurricane sequence. Basically, it's the story of a boy trying to impress his long-lost father, who takes an instant dislike to almost everything about his unimpressive son, especially his hat. First, get a new hat. Buster even sneaks an inside joke into the midst of this by quickly hiding the pork pie hat already long associated with him. Of course, Buster is in love with the daughter of the rich new steamboat owner who's actively trying to put Buster's old steamboat father out of business. The daughter's father has banned Buster from ever coming onto his boat. Buster's father insists that Buster stand up for himself and get right onto his girlfriend's boat. This leads to one of the funniest sequences in this final, sunny, beautifully constructed silent masterpiece, his 10th in 5 years. And so ended the great Keaton decade. His independence, his marriage, silent movies, everything he had achieved was forgotten. And pretty soon, he fell prey to the country Gore Vidal referred to as the United States of Amnesia. But back in 1965, the year before Keaton passed away, the Venice Film Festival gave a tribute to the great Buster, and he received the longest standing ovation in the history of this Italian festival. For more than 10 minutes, the applause rolled on. Buster was moved to tears.
He couldn't believe that anyone would care about these movies that he had made so long ago.
Eleanor was telling me he didn't understand it. It was 50 years after he made these films, and they were being appreciated like they were just opening for the first time. And he didn't get it.
It's amazing how timeless he is and how that type of physical comedy will never be unfunny. It was funny then, it's funny now, it'll be funny in 100 years. And how many filmmakers can you say that about?
They remembered him, he said, and yes, he will indeed never be forgotten.